Take a slow, gentle breath. In this space of stillness, stories become more than just words. They become mirrors. If you resonate with tales that awaken insight and stir the soul, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Journey Deeper. Now let the story unfold. Jade met Marcus in the summer heat of a yoga studio in downtown LA. The kind of heat that makes skin stick and hearts melt a little faster. She was there to find peace after a rough breakup. He, on the other hand, came mostly to check out girls in leggings. That's what he told her later, laughing, when the spark between them had grown into something more serious. They started like fire texting late into the night, kissing in cars, making love like it meant everything and nothing at the same time. He whispered Sanskrit mantras against her neck. She told him he smelled like incense and irresponsibility. They laughed, fought, made up, and circled back into bed. For a while, it felt spiritual. They meditated together on Sunday mornings, burned sage, pulled oracle cards. She started to believe they were karmic partners, two souls meant to meet, burn through their past wounds, and awaken together. But awaken to what? Things started to shift the night. Marcus attended a week-long meditation retreat and got a little too cozy with another attendee, a woman named Eleni, who, according to Jade's stalking on Instagram, looked like a mix between a forest nymph and a tantra coach. When Marcus came home, he brushed it off. Said Eleni was just a mirror that they'd shared sacred energy, but not bodies. Jade didn't buy it. What followed were nights of crying, accusations, declarations of non-attachment, and quotes from Osho thrown like knives. "You're clinging," Marcus said once. "You're avoiding intimacy," Jade shot back. And maybe they were both right. The confusion wasn't just about betrayal. It was deeper. Jade started wondering whether this was love or just another version of addiction. Was she craving him, or was she avoiding herself? Every time they touched, her nervous system flared with both pleasure and panic. One night, after a particularly ugly argument, Jade found herself sitting alone in her apartment, incense smoke curling toward the ceiling like a question. She picked up her phone and typed, "If we can't help each other awaken, what's the point?" She didn't send it. Instead, she sat there breathing, eyes half closed, as a new kind of question opened inside her. What does it really mean to be spiritual allies in love? The days that followed were quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the sharp, aching kind that rings in the spaces where once there was constant noise. Texts, calls, laughter, moans. Marcus didn't reach out, and neither did Jade. Instead, they both retreated inward. Jade began to wake up before dawn. She lit a single candle, sat on a cushion, and listened to her breath. 10 minutes, then 20, then 45. At first, her mind screamed. Images of Marcus and Eleni. The sound of his voice saying, "You're projecting." Her own voice pleading, then blaming, then finally breaking. But over time, the noise dulled. The breath took over. The silence grew roots. Across the city, Marcus sat in his one-bedroom apartment with a borrowed book of Pali Suttas and a heart he didn't know how to read. He had always thought himself awakened. But now, without Jade's emotional fuel, his own shadows started surfacing. The spiritual bypassing. The way he used language like attachment to dodge real closeness. The way he quoted Buddhist teachings to win arguments instead of embodying them. They didn't speak for 2 weeks. When they finally met again, it wasn't planned. It was at a Dharma talk given by a Vietnamese nun named Sister Min at a local Zen center. They locked eyes across the incense-scented hall, and for a moment, it felt like meeting for the first time without roles, without history. Just 2 people sitting in stillness. After the talk, they shared tea in silence. No apologies, no demands, just presence. That evening, Marcus asked quietly, "Do you think it's possible we're better apart?" Jade looked down, tracing the rim of her teacup. "Maybe, but I don't think that's the real question." He waited. "I think the real question is, can we grow together without using each other?" That night, they didn't go home together, but something between them had shifted. The fire was still there, but now it had form, containment, direction. Not long after, they began a new kind of relationship. Not lovers in the traditional sense. Not friends either. They became something more: rare spiritual companions. Allies on the path. Not always in sync, but always in practice. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old wounds flaring, egos rising like heat waves off desert asphalt. But now something was different. They had learned not to run from discomfort. They had learned to sit with it. Once, after a particularly vulnerable exchange, Marcus said, "You're like a mirror I never wanted but probably needed." Jade smiled, weary but honest. Same. They began integrating small practices to anchor their connection in awareness rather than reactivity. On Thursday evenings, they meditated together for 10 minutes before speaking. It was awkward at first. Jade would peek, annoyed that Marcus fidgeted. Marcus would silently count her inhales, as if trying to control her breath. But over time, the silence became fertile. It softened the edges of their language and gave space for deeper listening. They started what they called Dharma date nights. Instead of going out for drinks or watching shows, they would read one short teaching, sometimes a Zen koan, other times a line from the Dhammapada, and discuss how it landed in their lives. One night, they reflected on the line, "All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering." That night, they spoke not about each other, but about their parents, about childhood losses, about how much of their clinging came from trying to rewrite an old story through each other's bodies. Marcus, with tears in his eyes, admitted, "I don't know if I know how to love without needing something back." Jade reached across the table, not to fix him, not to answer, but to be with him. They weren't fixing each other. They were witnessing. Jade once wrote in her journal, "Love without awareness is just hunger with a mask on. But love with awareness? That's devotion without chains." They weren't always graceful. Sometimes they still raised their voices. But now, when they fought, they returned quicker. Returned not to the illusion of harmony, but to the commitment of presence. One morning, after a long walk in silence, Marcus turned to Jade and said, "You know, I used to think being spiritual meant being above jealousy, desire, anger. But now I think being spiritual just means not lying about it." Jade laughed, and not running from it. They were learning that real awakening doesn't mean rising above relationships. It means going through them, eyes open, heart bare, breath steady. Jade often thought about how many times she'd confused passion with purpose, lust with love, drama with depth. But now things felt slower, quieter, and in that stillness, more real. She and Marcus were redefining intimacy, not by how often they touched each other, but by how deeply they could sit in silence without flinching. They started practicing a simple ritual: write, then speak. When emotions ran high, instead of shouting or withdrawing, they'd each write a letter, read it aloud, and then sit quietly before responding. It changed everything. No more impulsive jabs. No more weaponized silence. Just space to feel and time to soften. Jade once said, "I think I used to want a lover who would rescue me from myself. Now I want someone who will sit beside me while I rescue myself." That, Marcus realized, was the work of a spiritual ally. Not someone who fixes you, not someone who fills the void, but someone who holds the light steady while you learn to walk through the dark. It wasn't a movie romance. No fireworks. No dramatic ultimatums. Just two humans learning to bow to each other's pain and to their own. They also had boundaries now. Days apart to reflect. Shared silence on Sundays. No assumptions, no expectations, only agreements made from clarity, not craving. And from this new foundation, something tender and powerful began to bloom. It was no longer about being perfect for each other. It was about being present with each other. They became allies in their commitment to truth, to awakening, to love that liberates instead of binds. Here are 3 techniques they discovered along the way, practices that can turn ordinary partnerships into sacred ground. 1. Co-meditation check-in. Sit together in silence before any emotionally charged conversation. Let the breath clear the dust before the words come through. 2. Dharma date night. Once a week, read a spiritual teaching together. Let it guide your reflections. Make space for honest sharing without fixing or judging. 3. Write then speak. When overwhelmed, write your truth. Then read it aloud. Let your partner witness it without interruption. Presence is more healing than reaction. In the end, love isn't a goal, it's a path, a mirror, a practice. And when walked with awareness, it becomes a temple built from the bricks of our brokenness, our beauty, and our becoming. If this story stirred something quiet yet deep inside you, pass it on. It may be the light someone else is waiting for. Subscribe for more stories where the sacred meets the everyday. And remember, sometimes it is in our breaking that the light finally enters.